community public and well-being. I have spoken for the past 20 years, 2 different groups in group settings and academic settings, and sometimes in community settings, but I really want to get the current information out there about mental health and well-being because I think the takeaway that I want you to have today, and I'll address it later, is that prevention is important. It reduces the likelihood of mental illness and deeper mental issues. And so when we have the tools and the information that we need, we are better off every way. So prevention. If you take nothing else from prevention and proactive care for your mental health. So hello to everyone online as well. Thank you for joining us here today. I love information and I have way too much information to share in the next hour. So I really want to get the message across to you that that whatever I don't share, if you have questions, I will be here a little bit after if you have questions you'd like to talk about, or I'm always open to having people reach out personally if you'd like to follow up on anything I shared today, or if I didn't get into some of this on the slides. And you have questions about that. I believe these slides will be shared or have been shared with you so you can look over them later as well. And I will put them on my website as well for information out there. So get this as close as I can so you can hear me and I can click. So the topic, when I was invited to speak, these were the things that were kind of showing up: mental health, stress, burnout, and substance use. And I have to say, lawyers excel in mental health conditions. Yeah, I don't know if that's a surprise to you or not, but based on the general population, and I will show you some of this information that the American Bar Association collected, high levels of depression, high levels of burnout, stress, anxiety, and preferred ways of coping: alcohol, substances. It's not uncommon, but there's also quite a bit happening in your field. Let's talk about different ways to cope. So a bit about me. I won't go through all of this. John shared some of it, but I realized some people have a passion for sports. Some people have a passion for comic books. I have loved mental health since I could remember. I've been practicing mental health coping skills and tools my whole life. I, in my childhood, experienced quite a bit of transition, which for children can definitely increase anxiety. And so I've kind of my whole life really integrated mental health and well-being into my practice. And so it was really no surprise to me or anyone in my family when I went to school for psychology, and then went on to get a degree as a licensure as a mental health counselor. I love talking about it. It is my passion and my hobby. And I do what I can to get that information. So this is the slide that if you want to enjoy your food, talk to other people amongst you, this is the one slide I want you to kind of pay attention to, and then you can do what you're going to do. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Working in mental health for the past 2 decades, I started out working in hospitals, state hospitals, with people who were severely and persistently mentally ill. And even at that time, in the academic settings, the things that I was hearing was, once you have schizophrenia, once you have a bipolar disorder diagnosis, once you have a suicide attempt, you're kind of like, it's too late. Our brains stopped developing and there's not too much we can do about it. That did not sit right with me. And so I kept searching and watching the development of the industry. And the good news is we have had a lot of research and support in the past 20 years to say that actually our brains continue to grow, our brains continue to change. Even when we have traumatic experiences, difficult situations, or stressors, there are things that we can do to continue to support our mental health and well-being. It is better to have less episodes of trauma and distress. It definitely is important, but even when we have those situations, there are things we can do to improve our lives, to change our brains, and to change our thoughts, actions, and behaviors to take care of our mental health. So this study, the references below, is in a recent article, Psychology Today, that a group got together and reviewed 54,000 case studies of what are the best interventions for mental health and well-being. And over 5 years of reviewing these, what they found was that psychological flexibility is the pathway to change, the pathway to mental health. And so they further defined psychological flexibility as awareness, openness, and valued engagement. And before I read this article, I actually thought, what would I say kind of works with the clientele that I see when I see people making changes? And so I created a different version of it with just the reminder of go to the park daily. If you go to the park daily, that's kind of relaxing, good for your well-being. But it's also a good way to remember the pieces of this, which pick whichever words you'd like to help you, but that regular practicing mental health care, practicing self-care, connection to community, things like that, focused attention to kind of what's going on in your life, self-reflection about your beliefs, your thoughts, the feelings that you have, the behaviors that you have, and making a commitment to your mental health and well-being. So, basically psychological flexibility, I also call it elasticity, or the ability to have that resilience when unexpected or chaotic things happen in your life. You have a system of handling that so that it is helpful rather than harmful. So before I go too far, and I'm putting this in a very timely place, I'm going to share a personal story, but I want to say that some topics that I talk about today may cause some discomfort. That's also common if you decide to go into therapy or mental health counseling. It's uncomfortable, which is why people sometimes don't want to go, or why by the time they go into therapy, it can be pretty painful. So I may talk about some things that are uncomfortable. Part of what I'm going to do today is introduce some of the grounding activities and self-care activities that you can do to help regulate the feelings that you may be experiencing, or to support that resilience and psychological flexibility that is mental well-being. And I encourage you to do what you need to be okay. You can plug your ears, you can close your eyes, you can walk out of the room. If you want to, you can cry. I welcome open crying if that feels good to you. Do whatever you need to do. I will just keep going with what I'm doing, but I encourage you to take care of yourself. If anything that I say brings up anything for you that you want to talk about afterwards, I will be here to check in with people. Working in this field for so many years, I probably have a little bit of, I guess, I've built up maybe some protection against that, and I don't always realize some of the things that I say that may be alarming to people who don't talk about this every day. So it's not my intention to cause any harm to anyone today. And if I do say something that is upsetting, please check in with me afterwards so I can adjust that. I have included a handout here. I was hoping to have some here, but didn't work out, so I have some digital pieces available, but a handout of 50 things you can do to improve your mental health and well-being. They're just a list of things that I've put together, broken down into categories that we'll get into, but having your own list of things or identifying the ways that you can relax and can de-stress and enjoy life can be really helpful. So the first self-care practice that I want to go through, because it's a nice subtle one, and it's one that if you have children, they probably learn it. I will say social emotional learning has been a great thing that I've seen happen in academia as well, that we are teaching children to talk about their emotions more. We're teaching children how to communicate in conflict better. And that is amazing and wonderful. And so this is something that you can do, something that I learned in the past couple of years that I thought, wow, this is actually really relaxing. So trace your hand self-care practice is you just take your hand and you actually trace the outline of it. Is that my alarm? No? Okay. Okay, okay. I have alarms set and they go off at certain times. So you trace your hand. If you notice that maybe you're feeling distressed or you're feeling nervous, you can just trace your hand and you can give this a try. You don't have to, but it's amazing, I think, how sensitive it is when you trace your hand and you don't notice that that's a part of you that you probably don't pay that much attention. So that body sensation, our nervous system has communicators all over our body. And one of those is to our skin. And that can be really soothing to connect yourself to your body and grounding to connect yourself to your body, to calm your emotions and even maybe give you some perspective about the thoughts or beliefs that are showing up. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about today are, I will talk about suicide because I think that it's important, and I know that when we talk about suicide, it actually is less likely to. So we're going to talk about it. Substance use. I don't often say substance abuse or substance misuse, even though that is something that comes up sometimes. I like to look at substance use from a different perspective of, you know, how is it helping or harming me? When am I using it? And what's happening around that? Because we do have a culture of substance use that is often very social, also celebratory, and sometimes we start using it as a medication or as something to distract or avoid the feelings or thoughts that we're experiencing. So we'll talk about that. So there are so many ways to talk about mental health. And I do like a spectrum view, which is a very modern way of talking about it. I did create a little bit of a spectrum here to look at this. Why does mental health matter? And the way that I look at mental health, one of the ways is I kind of look at a mentally healthy side and mental illness, which is really how we used to talk about mental health in the past. It always used to be mental, and it's moving more towards mental health. I noticed when I made this that I didn't put any like mentally healthy states on here. I was like, if you get to the mentally healthy side, hopefully, you know, you're like, hey, I feel good. I'm mentally healthy. But I put sort of the decline of mental health and how that can sometimes show up. There's a lot missing here. It's intended to be very basic, but that what we see a lot in the words that we use are, I like to make some comparisons. So we identify stress a lot as something that happens. Anyone here experience stress in your life? Yeah, just a little probably. Yeah, and that is in my world, I call that anxiety. And if you're going into therapy, they might say stress, but that's also anxiety. A lot of times I get people who come in and say, I don't want to be anxious. I'm like, that's cool. That's not going to happen. Anxiety happens in life. Anxiety is part of not feeling in control of some of the things that are happening and wanting to feel more control over that. So it's really important to learn how to identify stress, how to identify what makes you stressed or anxious, and then have those things that work to de-stress, reduce that anxiety. If you don't handle your stress and anxiety, it moves into burnout or sometimes depression. You start to kind of feel hopeless and helpless and giving up on the things that you were fighting so hard to control. And if that happens continually or repeatedly, you can move into acute stress or post-traumatic stress. Or if there are big events that you're not prepared for, it can turn into some sort of stress disorder. I didn't touch too much on trauma in this presentation, but I do have a blog article on my website that talks about trauma, what trauma is. It is your experience, the effects of that experience, and your response to it. So kind of how you take in that experience. And so we use this word trauma in therapy a lot, but the idea is that traumatic experiences happen, small or big, in our lives, and how we respond to them changes who we are. And we can't get away from that. And so knowing that when we have traumatic experiences, whether they're big or small, situations that we adjust and we evolve and we try to respond to differently. If we have that awareness and openness of psychological flexibility, we're able to be resilient in that. And if we don't have the tools and the supports that we need, things get worse. So I am going to take a moment and talk about the ACEs and study, and some of that is, are we all familiar with that, or is anyone familiar with that? It's getting pretty common knowledge now. It was done, I think, around 30 years ago, so maybe more. But the study of adverse childhood experiences and how they impact our medical, our physical health. That when children who experience abuse or divorce or incarceration in their family settings or a variety of other things, this shows up later in life as medical conditions, diabetes, stroke, all sorts of medical conditions are related to that emotional trauma that's occurring, or sometimes physical trauma that's occurring in childhood. Also, it's not limited to childhood. This happens throughout our whole lives. Another piece of the study that was addressed in a recent article of, I believe, American Psychologist earlier this year, talked about the other side of this ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, as BCEs or PCEs, so benevolent childhood experiences or positive childhood experiences. And the idea that those, when children, and I'll say again, when adults have positive experiences, they help to balance out the difficult experiences that we're having. So some of the experiences identified as BCEs are, for children, are being a part of a team, having an adult or a teacher you can talk to or trust, having hobbies or diversions for yourself, being able to express your feelings. And I'm saying this all as children because that's how the studies are talked about, but it goes for adults too, right? If you are feeling stressed out, having those outlets, people you can talk to, things you can do, will reduce the amount of trauma that you experience. So if you go along this spectrum, PTSD unaddressed becomes maybe more complex PTSD. Sometimes we have relational trauma, difficult relationships that kind of make the rest of our relationships hard. And we can move into personality disorders. So sometimes that is maybe some narcissism, maybe some feeling strong ways about certain things that are adaptive, but are not working for you anymore. And then when we get really far along the line, sometimes we have psychosis or disillusionment or disconnection that can really draw you away and have you question your whole life. So it goes, if we don't attend to these things, they can get worse. And if we are attending to them, we can resolve them and move forward. So I put a couple of reminders for myself on here, but I'm going to move forward pretty quickly with this. I do want to say that with journaling, self-care practice journaling, I have people ask me all the time, does journaling really work? My therapist told me to journal. I say, oh, you know what? Yeah. Yep, it does. There was a very small study a few years ago. A minister, counseling minister said, hey, I'm going to see all the people that come into my office, half of them, I'm going to say, we're going to do weekly therapy. The other half, I'm going to say journal. And when you journal, you can just put one sentence. Like, it doesn't have to be a lot, but journal maybe once a week, sort of a thought about yourself here. And then 6 months later, he did anxiety and depression scales on the people, all had high levels of anxiety and depression. 6 months later, he provided those scales to both people, and the result was very similar. That whether you were doing weekly therapy or whether you were doing a very brief journal check-in with yourself about your life, it reduced your anxiety and depression. It is very, very effective to take a moment of self-reflection and just say, what did I do today? What's happening in my life? How do I feel about it? It is a pathway to change because you start increasing that awareness and self-reflection and commitment and openness, those things that create psychological flexibility. One of the ways that I see mental health showing up a lot, and this is not to say that homeless or houseless people are always mentally unhealthy. It is not more so or less so, but I do see that some of the impacts of homelessness can really impact mental health and well-being. It can be very hard. And often in my personal experience working with people who are severely or persistently mentally ill, a lot of them have experienced or are currently experiencing homelessness, and that definitely makes it harder. And they typically didn't get to where they are without a lot of happening in their lives, and maybe even using substances or other things with some really unimaginable. So the story of Bruce is a personal story from name and details are changed. But when I was about 20, I think I mentioned that I started out working in state hospitals. And so a lot of young people were working there. We were all going to college. Some of us in mental health, nursing, going to law school, things like that. And we had a really close group of friends. In this community, there were also a lot of families working in the same setting. So cousins, brothers, sisters, people knew each other. One day I came to work and one of my friends was very visibly upset. And I said, what's going on? And he said, well, my cousin killed himself yesterday. And his cousin worked there with us at the mental hospital, working with people every day who were experiencing suicidal thoughts, mental health conditions, in a really close-knit community. And so one of the people that we worked with took his life. What were the circumstances? Whether that matters or not, I'm sharing it because I think it matters here. He went to take his LSAT. I don't know if it was first or second time that he took it. He did not wait for the results. He felt a lot of pressure. He felt like he didn't do well. He felt like apparently, and I'm speaking for him, I don't know what he felt, but I'm guessing that he didn't feel maybe like he could talk to anyone about it. And I do get emotional sometimes, so I hope that's okay. He ended his life at 20 years old. Well, for something that is important, was important to him, but not final and not permanent. Didn't have to be. So I told you I'll be talking about suicide today as a part of it, because I do think that that's an important piece when we have depression, when we have anxiety, when we have a lot of stress and burnout, and when we're using substances. Those things increase the likelihood of suicidal thoughts and actions. And there are always alternatives. This person was surrounded by people who maybe should have known, maybe could have helped, and were there to support. And the way that suicidality works is it doesn't matter if all that's there in that moment. None of it seems real. It is truly a part of how the brain works that is really, so I've dedicated a lot of my work. I spent about 5 years working on a suicide hotline, talking with people, talking them through that situation, because if you are feeling those, having those thoughts or those feelings, it is temporary. In the moment, it feels like forever, but it is time. And so that's some of the information that I want to get out there. I also want to get out there because I might not have time later. I do want to say that I lost my train of thought. That it is very, very normal to have passive suicidal thoughts from time to time. And we don't normalize that. We don't normalize the fact that sometimes people think, I don't want to be here. Things would be better if I wasn't here. What if I got hit by a car today? Those thoughts do pass through everyone. If we're noticing them, that doesn't mean that we need to go check ourselves into the hospital. It does mean that maybe we need to check in with ourselves and check so that those things don't. We know that people are there to address that. So sadly, that was not the only suicide that I've experienced in my life. It was just one of the first. And I do like to do what I can to encourage anyone not to feel like that's the choice for them. So we are probably not going to get through all of these things, but these are some of the things that I want to talk about today with you. If you have questions, feel free to ask them as we go along, and I will try to do what I can. I know I'm just going to cover a brief overview because there's a lot here. So the first part, we're going to talk about mental health and well-being. And you can see all those things. I decided to show Maslow's hierarchy of needs, even though there are much more modern variations of this that are more complex and look very different. I thought, let's keep it simple. These are basic human needs. Some of what he originally created in this model has shifted in that maybe it's not so much of a pyramid as we can attend to these different needs or at different times, and some of these needs are a little bit more expanded. But the basic idea of that humans have needs, and when we are able to attend to these needs, we feel well, we do well. And when we're not, we get stuck. And stuck is another word we kind of use in my field for anxiety, burnout, or stress, like that. Hard to use. So we have physiological needs, of course, food, shelter. We have safety needs to feel like it's okay, and we are able to move in the world without having to always have our guard up and be in that fight or flight mode. We have needs for love and belonging. They vary from person to person, but we all do have a need to feel like we belong and that we are loved. And then feelings of esteem and self-actualization. This is part of kind of that human experience, the things that we everything that we're doing every day. Why you decided to probably falls somewhere in this. I'm sure in the other version, I know it's probably hard for you to see. You can look at it later, but it's another way that we talk about mental health sometimes is that are we surviving or are we thriving in life? And again, some of the things that we look at are we're thriving. Maybe we feel calm and steady. We feel like what to predict, and that even if things come up, we know how to handle them. A lot of people are surviving and thinking maybe that they're right. Surviving and just getting through, but maybe something's not quite right. And then we struggle from time to time. Hopefully we get through those struggles and we move back into a surviving or a thriving space. And then occasionally we get into crises. And when we get into crises, those are usually the times that something is just really not right. And we need to figure out how to do it. So that's just some of the language that we use about mental health. And then the framework that I like to use as a counselor. So, people who provide therapy have a variety of titles. There are mental health counselors, social workers, nurses, psychiatrists, psychologists, all sorts of people providing mental health counseling and support. And we all pretty much, it blends back and forth. But I intentionally chose counseling as my profession because it's very wellness focused and strengths based. And I think that that's really important in helping people move through traumatic experiences. So SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, I think is what it's called, SAMHSA.gov, has a wellness wheel. They say there are 8 areas of wellness. When we look at all these areas of wellness, they impact each other, and they we need to address and attend to them to have holistic wellness or to feel well and good in life. So SAMHSA has the 8 areas of wellness. I actually identify 9 because I do identify sexual health specifically because a lot of times we don't talk about, and it absolutely can impact our relationships, our view of ourselves, and our overall well-being. But we have these other areas, physical health, social, financial. Those, I think, if you want to have more information about those, I do have those QR codes that go into some resources that I've developed with that. But some of those are kind of generally self-explanatory. The ones that I like to focus a little bit more time on are occupational and professional, because we often do associate our paid occupation as that piece of health. But sometimes our occupation, if we are working from home, raising children, unemployed, volunteering, retired, all of those states also are occupations, are also our things that we do to create fulfillment and purpose in life. And so occupational or professional is an area that is, even if you are not employed or in between employment, is still something to address. And then environmental, I like to point out environmental well-being as something that is the environments that you find yourself in, and then the things that you're doing to create the environments that you want to be in. So sometimes we go into an office and we don't have that much of a choice about what that setting is. I have to go there to go to work. How is that impacting my life? Am I spending most of my time in my car? Am I getting out in the woods to do some nature bathing? What are the things? How is my environment impacting? And areas that we have control over that are typically in our homes and sometimes in our work settings, and then the way we spend our free time. So environmental wellness is really paying some attention to that and modifying that into ways that are promote well-being for you. And then I also like to talk about spiritual a little bit, because spiritual sometimes we have maybe a connection to a religion or things like that, and that is spirituality. And sometimes religion is not part of the belief system that we hold, and there are other ways to consider how to connect spiritually, whether it's to nature, your how you view your purpose here in life, or the things that you do to really connect to the greater universe. So these areas do have some flexibility with how we view them. Each of them are important in attending to for our holistic well-being. Self-care practice, number 3 that I'm mentioning. So all of these are things that you may want to try later if they work for you. But is the self-assessment. So it is literally, I included a link on here to a worksheet, but you can do this on a piece of paper if you wanted to, drawing this wagon wheel, which, by the way, anyone know where this wagon wheel is? Or whatever this wheel is? What's that? Texas, good guess. A little bit closer. Yeah. Did you say that? Where, do you know where in Tenino? Yep, exactly. One of my favorite places to go to have some self-care and all this. And I was there the other day with my dogs, and I was like, oh, there are eight kind of sections of this that's meaningful. So most of the pictures that you see, all the pictures you see I took, and they're all part of my own self-care, is to take amateur pictures of the places I like to go. And then you'll also see some memes on here, which I do. Part of my self-care is when it comes to social media or anything that's coming into our view and focus, there are a lot of negative things coming into our view. all the time. So we can be intentional about following or paying attention to things that help us to feel good. So you will see some photos of memes here. Those are things that I do when I'm scrolling and I'm checking out. I'll take a screenshot of it and then I'll see it later pop up on my phone or pop up on my screensaver to remind me and kind of put in a subconscious level of self-care. So those are two things that I use for my own well-being. And I'll tell you, it works. For me, at least. Yeah, when you follow upsetting things, politics or whatever, it gets into your system. So putting a little bit of positive experiences in can really help. So here are some of the numbers. We'll talk a little bit more about this information, where these numbers come from in the next slide. But these were self-reports from your peers and maybe some of you. I don't know how wide the survey was for this, but this is what we talked about at the very beginning. Self-reports of mental health challenges faced by attorneys during your career, during that span. Anxiety, 61%. So you can do your own little self-assessment here if you fit into that or not. Depression, 45% say, yep, I've experienced some depression throughout my career. And then social anxiety, ADHD, panic disorders, bipolar disorder, suicidal thoughts, 1 in 10. It is not that uncommon, but we just don't talk about it. And then at least one suicide attempt, not quite 1% have said, yep, done that at some point in my life. I got to that. That's where I felt I was. Some of the key discoveries of the study, which I like to point out, the first one, depression, 28%. That doesn't match depression, 45.7%. I see that. I know that. One is specifically stating, yes, I had depression. I've experienced depression at some time. The depression, the 45% is over the span of your career. And then the other one, I think it says more on the other slide, but is more recent or fictional. Men report higher levels of depression than women, and rates decreased as age increased. Good. There are some reasons for that, but that is definitely good. And then in junior positions, there are higher rates. Any ideas why that might be? That yes, what? Yeah, exactly. Not a lot of control, doing a lot of the work, learning a lot of things that are happening, right? Feeling that maybe that less safety and less support. And we'll talk a little bit about what we can do about that if we can get to it. And then, so here is more information. I know it's kind of small, but the study was, I'll read it for you. In collaboration with the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation, the ABA Commission on Lawyer Assistance Programs, did a study to gather information about what you're experiencing in your field when it comes to mental health conditions and stuff. So they also did a study, a questionnaire of law students to see what those experiences are as well. And very hard to read. Again, you'll have these slides later, but maybe not surprising, some of the highest numbers of stress, burnout, and substance use. And we'll see another figure later on that. Also on the right side, they questioned help-seeking attitudes and found that the discouraging factors, some of them being very specifically, and I'm sorry, I'm going to actually look down and see what it says. Potential threat to bar admission, 63%. Makes sense if you're worried about your profession that you may not want to go and get help because it could impact you in very big ways. that is for substance use. So I don't want to say I have a substance use issue because it's going to impact me, right? And for mental health, also some of the shame associated with it or the stigma associated with it, as well as ability to talk to someone or a therapist. So how does mental health impact your job performance and your personal life? I listed a couple, but I want to know what you think. How does your mental health, for better or worse, impact your job or your life?
I like more for other days.
Yeah, that's probably not good when you think about your whole body system, right? I mean, it is an important signal to your body that you're stressed out. It's definitely a call to attention about what maybe you need to do to relax as you go up to those dates, right? And what you think or believe about yourself because of the circumstance. Yeah, with what I see with mental health conditions around is that when you are feeling really stressed or burnt out, it's hard to focus. You get more distracted. You want to check out. Maybe you have a shorter temper, feel disorganized, or like things aren't going together very smoothly, um, and other things that kind of move on that decline. In your personal life, stress impact your relationships? Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Really hard because there are a lot of things that are values that are conflicting, right? A lot of pressure, and our modern world really pushes us to kind of say, do more, be more, do it all. Especially, that women are my specialty, so I do address that. Like I feel strongly about that. In your personal life, maybe you do have a shorter temper and are lashing out, or you find yourself withdrawing. I know in my own life that if people in my family are spending too much time on their phone, they're probably stressed out. We are, very connected to our phones and things like that in today's world, but using it too much, maybe checking out from the people right around you. So beneath every behavior, there's a feeling, and beneath that feeling is a need. And when we meet that need, rather than focus on the behavior, we begin to deal with the cause, not the symptom. This is referring back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What are those behaviors and those feelings that we're having? What are the needs that we're not getting met when we're having those behaviors? So I'm going to move forward from this because we address it in other slides. Recognize stress and burnout. This is one of my stress reliefs. This is one of my dogs, and he's having a very stress-free life at Cannon Beach right there. And he is a great stress, big snuggler, very loving. So in this next part, we're going to talk about recognizing stress and burnout, the symptoms, stressors that you experience in your profession, consequences of unmanaged stress, and self-care. So briefly, the self-care. I see we only have a few minutes left. So I'm gonna wrap this up in about the next 7 minutes and save a little bit of time if that's okay. Is that okay? Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to skip the body scan. You can look those up. It is basically going head to toe or toe to head and checking in either by flexing a muscle or just noticing. Really powerful practice for mental health. So burnout, very briefly, burnout was coined in 1975 with identifying 3 parts. You can do a self-check-in to see if this is true for you. But burnout is emotional exhaustion. And you care too much and you just can't care anymore. Anyone ever been there? I have been there, definitely. Care too much. Depersonalization, loss of empathy or compassion. That's a big one. And then, wow, does it really impact other people as well? When we lose our sense of connection. Decreased sense of accomplishment. What's the point of doing it? So those are kind of the three things of burnout. If you're getting to that place, you probably felt that way. What's so stressful about being a lawyer? These are things that I thought of based on life, but I don't know. You tell me. Do these match up? Are there other things I'm missing? What? Judges. Oh, I didn't put judges on here. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You like your job, right, is in conflict as far as I know. Like there's a lot of conflict happening. Also probably big deadlines, not a lot of time, a lot of getting into the nitty gritty and yeah, and probably your clients aren't super happy all the time. Yeah. Yeah, somebody's upset with something. Yeah, I bet. So what happens if you don't handle your stress and burnout? I kind of went I went full force on this, kind of going all the way to the end, but depression happens if you don't handle your stress and burnout. You could lose your job. You may experience an increase in suicidal or yes, homicidal thoughts, right? Happens, even passively. You will feel disconnected from family and friends. They might start to get mad at you and notice that you're not around or you're always being kind of grumpy or things like that. And when it gets pretty far, I mean, homelessness does happen. Interestingly, one of the authors and leaders in the field that I like to follow, Gabor Mate, you may have heard of him. He has a book called something, I think it's in the realm of hungry ghosts. It talks about substance use and abuse. And one of the statistics that he mentions in that is that men are more likely to be homeless and use substances and not have the social connection and support that they need to not move in that direction. There is a lot of stigma and a lot of pressure to not talk about this. And the result is homelessness and disconnection. Yeah.
So I grew up, so to speak, as a lawyer in a large fabulous firm. But what I learned is that burnout, at least, especially with the recent news, is when you feel all those things in an institute, in a system not working for you. And the difference between that and illness is when you get out of it, you feel better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these things often go away. You make that big shift and that perspective being out of a system,
Yeah.
a community that it is self is not well, has mental illness collectively or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
When you leave it, you feel better.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the environmental wellness that you mentioned. Yeah. And really one of the traditional definitions of psychology is that you aren't acting like the norm. And so it can be very disillusioning to be in a situation like that where the norm is burnout. The norm is a system that moves people into burnout. So you're right. Getting out of that environment can actually be the cure. Sometimes be the healing piece. And if we left every environment that was difficult, it was like moving a lot, like that's gonna show up in other spaces. So it's good to learn how to deal with that. So here's one of the slides that I was talking about that I wanted to share. So in the survey, they said, have you experienced problematic drinking? Do you think you have experienced hazardous or possible dependence in your substance use? 6.4% of the general population says yes. 21% of all attorneys say yes. And 32% of attorneys under 30 say yes. So this is where we're excelling in a way that we want to be, not excel so much. One thing I do say to my clients is when you were doing something well, you got that, good job. Now let's move on to something else to rebalance a little bit, okay? And that doesn't mean abstinence necessarily. I mean, it really works for some people and it doesn't work for everyone, but really checking in with yourself about your substance use and how it's impacting and your life. So we'll skip, let's see, the link between stress, burnout, and substance use. So part of it is with substance use, it is sometimes it seems casual, it seems socially acceptable, and often it is used to soften the emotions that you might be feeling, or the thoughts that you might be having, or the situations that you're in that you don't have very much control over. And so it can be important to notice what those factors are, and if the substances are helping, or usually what they're doing is sort of just slowing the reaction. I have rarely found someone who was using substances to depress a feeling or emotion that didn't have to later on address the feeling or the thought or the emotion that was happening. Sometimes it's moments later, sometimes it's the next day when you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, did I drunk dial that person? Or sometimes it's years later when you realize that maybe you've been coping that way. In my early career, I wasn't really a fan of the Serenity Prayer. I was like, oh, geez, all this stuff. It's actually fantastic and wonderful. It is a wonderful mantra to have as part of your daily self-care if you connect with it. But, you know, generally, right, let me recognize the things I can control, the things I can't control, and the wisdom to know the difference, what you are able to. Accept what you can and know the difference. That in some ways to me is mental health in a nutshell as well. We can't control it. So a question for yourself, how has substance use impacted my professional or personal life? You can think about that to yourself. If you're someone who doesn't use substances, I would guess that it's still impacting your life because probably people around you are. So thinking about how that substance is impacting your own personal and professional life and goals. I'm going to skip this, although it's really, really important. I'm going to skip dissociation and just generally say that dissociation is a term that we use that it really means zoning out, checking out. We do it all the time. It is very healthy in some ways, and we can also do it maybe more compulsively or in unhealthy ways. So we can check out by watching TV at night, by snuggling, by running a mile, by anything you do. You may be giving your brain a little bit of a break to check out from time to time. If we're doing it too much, that's when it becomes an issue, if it's impacting our lives. If we're doing it for little breaks to keep going in the stress that we have, that can be helpful. This little meme, though, that I shared is you've got to start romanticizing your life is really about the opposite of dissociation. It's about really connecting to everything, enjoying that meal. Find a way to enjoy it. Enjoying your cup of coffee, enjoying everything about your life. How do you know when your drinking is a problem? I'm going to skip that. So when we talk about if you notice that you have a problem, and like usually people are kind of aware of the burnout, stress, or substance issue, there's somewhere in you that you're like, wait a second, this maybe is much, not right. Coping strategies go a long way to reduce the symptoms that you're experiencing. Counseling or therapy or other activities are sometimes important to get to the roots of what's going on. But when it comes to mental health, I do say to people, therapy is not for everyone, and it doesn't have to be for everyone. You know, kinetic activity, having a physical way to move your body can be a really great coping strategy. Having routines that calm you are really important. So if you have the skills and the tools that you need, you can get through those things. And if you don't, then maybe it's time to connect with someone about
I'm gonna unfortunately have to cut Katie off. It's 1 o'clock. I wish we had more time. This was excellent. And it's kind of cliche, but if there's a takeaway, I think it may be we're not alone. I heard some things that relate to. I saw a lot of people nodding their heads with a lot of things that were being said. That was excellent. I think we're going to have another mental health CLE sometime soon. And can we all give Katie a hand, please? Yes, I feel like we cut her off too soon. She did say she would stick around to answer questions afterwards. We've sent out the slides. I also want to thank Heather Lichtenberg, our amazing helper for the TCBA. If we'd give her a hand. And last but not least, Tim, who brings out the food, waits at the tables for us, and is a manager here. Have a good weekend, everybody. Excellent.
Yeah, it's okay. I'll be there.
Not just A lot of confidence.
Katie, that was great.
Yeah.
Right, cleared out. Just so you know, in case makes you feel good, this was like one of the bigger turnouts that we've had. Really. Yeah, I'm not doing it. I thought it was a good topic.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they were happy.
Oh, good.
I saw a lot of new faces.
Oh, well, I hope that was able to share some of that. I get excited. to share it all. Post it. Yeah, thanks. Well, yeah, I'll have to, like I said, I've only been there once so far, but it
Yeah.
sounds like it's pretty close.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. New